Here is a true false question that you should be able to answer at the end of this lecture. Defining an input context for an intent will prevent that intent from being directly invoked. Is this true or false? Now, we've considered a bunch of conversations which run linearly. Let's go back to the example conversation that we saw earlier, where our customer wants to book a room on our site and he provides a bunch of information for this booking to move forward. One thing to note about this dialogue is that it's entirely configured within a single intent. All the back and forth, all the prompts, all the responses from the chatbot as well as from the user is all acting within the same book room's intent. This is one example of a linear dialogue. A linear dialogue is any back and forth between the bot and the user, the objective of which is to collect information required to complete the action. The thing to note about linear dialogues is that it can span multiple intents as well. All the linear dialogues that we've seen so far have only been within a single intent, but a linear dialogue may invoke one or more intents. Let's take another example of a conversation and see how that might run. The customer might ask our bot, book a queen room for me in Bangalore tomorrow. Done. Room is booked. All the information has been provided. The booking is successful. Now, the user might say something like this: book a car too. What will be the response of the bot in this situation? What will the bot say? What should the bot say so that this conversation is natural and it's easy for the user to book a car once he has a room booked? This is where our user's dialogue with our bot gets interesting because the first query invoked the book room's intent. Once the room was booked, the second query invoked the book car's intent. So there are multiple intents involved here, and both of these intents, the book rooms as well as the book cars, have some information in common that they collect. Now, from our customer's point of view, he or she has no idea that he's actually invoking different intents. All of that is abstracted away from him. As far as he is concerned, these are not two separate conversations. The car booking is an extension of the room's conversation. Not so for us, not so for the way we've set up our agent. But in order for us to give the user a natural and conversational experience, the context that is associated with the book room's intent has to be carried forward to the book car's intent. Here, when I use the term context, I'm specifically referring to information that is relevant to the second conversation, which needs to flow through from the first. Here, there is just one bit of information from the first conversation that the book car's intent needs, and that is the date of the room booking. The date we book the room is the same date for which we want the car, and the user should not have to answer the question again about what date he wants this car booked for. We should automatically pick up this information from the room that he booked earlier, even if it was part of a different intent. With the current configuration that we have for our book cars and book rooms intents, let's first try something out. First, I'm going to try and book a single room for myself in LA for Tuesday. This booking should succeed right away because all the parameter values are present. And it does. We've hit the book room's intent, we have all the parameter values, and our bot gives us a positive response. As a user, it's very normal for me to follow this up with book a car as well. If a human had been at the other end of the conversation instead of a bot, the human would immediately understand what I'm saying. The question the bot now asks me is, what kind of car would you like? That is perfectly reasonable. So I'll be nodding along and saying, yes, I'd like a sedan. Now I would expect our intent to have all the information that it needed to go ahead and book a car. But no, now it comes back with, when do you need the car? This is because the required slot for the date parameter has not yet been filled for the book car's intent. Now, if I'd actually been a real customer at the other end trying to perform this booking, this would really annoy me. I just gave you information about the date that I want the room for. I want the car for the exact same date. Why didn't you remember? This is a natural question for the customer to ask. And indeed, we should remember. We should configure our dialogue so that context flows from the book room's intent to the book car's intent. And this is just a simple example. As examples get more complicated, a bot which does not have this context in which the conversation takes place is not likely to pass the Turing test, which means it's going to be an annoyance or a hindrance rather than a help on your website or app. So let's get working setting up the context. We want the date information to pass from book rooms to book cars, so we'll go and configure the context on book rooms first. Context is up there at the very beginning of the screen. Context represent the current environment of a user's request. You could use this context to store a variety of information. Any information that the user has provided to our bot can be stored in this context, and you can also define for how long you want this information to be alive and after how many requests you want it to expire. Notice in the context section that there are two different kind of contexts we can configure, the input context as well as the output context. The input context contains all the information that flows into this intent from previous intents or previous conversations that the user had. The output context is information that has been collected in this intent and flows out of this intent to intents which are invoked after this one. I'm going to go ahead and create an output context for the book room's intent. This is the set date context. Set date is the name of the context and is a unique identifier for this context. You can refer to this specific context by its unique identifier in other intents as well. You can imagine set date to be kind of a map data structure which contains the parameter names and the parameter values that flow out of this intent that has been gathered by this intent and flow out of this intent. Once you assign an output context and hit enter, you'll find that this context is automatically associated with a number. This 5 represents the number of requests after which this context will expire. So once the user has made 5 requests to the agent, this particular set date context will expire. By default, contexts expire after 5 requests or 10 minutes from the time they were activated. Now, within those 10 minutes or within those 5 requests, if you hit the book room's intent again, then this context will be renewed and the counter will be reset. The clock will be reset. You can click on the number 5 and edit it right there to update the number of requests for which you want this context active. I'm just going to edit it and set it to 3 to show you that it can be done. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Our intent is saved and updated. Our ML algorithm associated with the agent is also updated. And now we are ready to move on to the book car's intent. Now, the book car's intent needs to be edited to accept the context that is flowing out of book rooms. That means we need to set the input context to be the set date context, which flows out of book rooms and into book cars. Here is an important bit of detail that you need to remember about the book car's input context. Once an input context has been set on an intent, that intent absolutely requires the input context to be set before it can be invoked. So you cannot now invoke the book car's intent without setting the set date input context. User expressions or phrases uttered by the user will match the book car's intent only if the set date context is also set. I want information to flow from book rooms to book cars, so I'm going to delete the output context in the book car's intent. And there is this additional bit of configuration that I need to do in order to ensure that the book car's intent picks up the date value that has been passed in via the set date context. Go to the parameters table where we have date marked as a required parameter and click on the 3 vertical dots on the side. This will pop up a menu which you can use to configure the parameter. What we want to do is to set the default value, and the value that we get for this is from the set date context. In the dialog box that pops up, specify hash set date dot date. So the name of the context from where we are extracting this information is the set date context. It has to be preceded by a hash, and then it's followed by a dot and the name of the variable or the placeholder for the date value. The placeholder date is the parameter name that flows in from the book room's context. Go ahead and hit close on this dialog and then hit save on your intent, and we are now ready to test our updates. The first thing that you need to do before testing this stuff is to click on reset context so that all previous contexts are clear and you're starting off on a fresh slate. Once you click on this button, you'll get a message which says context will be cleared with the next query, and then you can go ahead and enter your next query. We'll use the same query as before. Book a single room for me in LA on Tuesday. We get a successful room booking response from our bot, but the interesting thing to note here is that the context has been set to the set date context. This is the output context that we had set up for the book room's intent. Remember that the set date context contains the date information from the book room's intent. Now, let's try and book a car as well. We say book a car to, and notice that the book car's intent is what is invoked, and notice that the context still is set to set date. Now, the next response is what type of car would you like? Everything is the same as before. But once you specify the car that you're interested in booking an SUV, the booking will be successful. And the booking is for the same date for which we booked the room. We've configured the bot well. It was smart enough to pick up the default value of date from the book room's intent. And it did not ask the unnecessary question of what date we wanted the car booking for. Now, this is great. We've managed to pass information from the book room's intent to the book car's intent, but we've inadvertently got something else to stop working. Now let's try booking a car directly without booking a room. This I can do by simply saying book a car for Monday. This was something that worked earlier and we had tested it out when we configured our book car's intent. But this time around, something's gone wrong. Instead of invoking the book car's intent, it has invoked the default fallback intent. And if you remember from our very first section, the default fallback intent is called only when Dialogflow can't understand what is it that you're asking. Your agent is unable to understand your request. That's when the default fallback intent is called. So basically, because we configured, so why couldn't we book a car directly without actually booking a room? That is the answer to this question. Once you have an input context defined on an intent, you can't invoke that intent directly without having that input context set up. So when we tried to book a car directly, we didn't have the set date input context set up, which is why we could not trigger or invoke that intent. We fell through to the default fallback intent. So the answer to the question here is true. Defining an input context for an intent will prevent the intent from being directly invoked.